So let's pray. Lord, you truly are the great I am. And we're just so thankful to worship you here tonight, to come to gather. And Lord, we are family. We say that all the time amongst ourselves, and I truly feel that way. And I have so many here, they express that back to me. We sense and know how much you love us and how we love the brethren here. And it is one big family. We're so thankful for that. And we ask that as we gather now as a family around your word, that you would speak to us, Lord, as we look at the life of David and the mistakes he made, and Lord, how he was also a man after your own heart, Lord, and how you were able to use him. And there are so many principles that we've been finding here, and so many we will see in these chapters tonight. So instruct us by your Holy Spirit, and we pray this in Jesus' name. We all said, amen. There was a 5-year-old boy, and he was in the room playing with his 2-year-old sister, and the little sister just grabbed onto his hair. You know how those little 2-year-olds can. It just didn't let go, and he was like, ah! And mom heard the screaming, so she comes running in, and she sees, her son is like screaming, the little 2-year-old sister, and she kind of gets the little grip out of the hair, and she says, "That's okay, son. She just doesn't know. She doesn't know." "Okay, Mom." And so she leaves the room, and all of a sudden she hears the 2-year-old screaming, "Ah!" She comes running in, and the 5-year-old's got his hand around the 2-year-old. She goes, "What are you doing?" Well, now she knows. It's not, I was thinking about it because it's not easy to forgive, isn't it? It's not. We like to get back, and we see that, of course, displayed in our kids, and, of course, sometimes we see that in our own lives. As we come to this section here in Samuel, we're going to see a lot of different things, but one of them is the forgiving spirit of David, and we'll see that even as he has to deal in the aftermath of his son Absalom seeking to usurp the kingdom, and of course we're going to see his demise in this section as well. So there's a lot of lessons that we have in this passage, but we're going to see some of the things from David that, as I see, really made him a man after God's own heart, and one of those traits, again, is forgiveness. We'll see that here. But let's begin in chapter 18. And again, keep in mind that Absalom has taken the kingdom. David had to flee. You remember, he's in the wilderness. And now we come to chapter 18, verse 1. And David numbered the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. So we also saw that many people came with David to support him, to encourage him, even though Absalom had taken over the kingdom. But David had a lot of friends, and in fact, he had a lot of friends. And we ended last week talking about what a blessing it is to have friends. Proverbs 18:24 says, "If a man would have friends, he himself will be friendly." And of course, we all want friends, and there are different levels of friendship, and we need to be friends to people if we want those friends. And of course, David was a man who really displayed that, and so he had many that came to his side. So now in verse 2, David sent out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. And the king said to the people, "I will surely also go out with you myself." So again, David knows that Absalom is going to pursue him now to take his life. And so he divides his troop under 3 different captains. And of course he said, "I'll come to battle." And of course David was a man of war. But the people answered and said, "You shall not go out. For if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die will they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now, for you are now more help to us in the city." So they urged David, don't go to battle. One, because if you're killed, our whole cause is lost. We're here to support you, to bring you back into the kingdom. Not only that, it would also be very difficult for David to fight against his own son, right? And then thirdly, they say here, you're more help to us in the city. David had military genius. He can, be able to take everything behind the scenes. So the king says to him, verse 4, "Whatever seems best to you, I will do." So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, those are his 3 captains, saying, "Now deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. So he didn't want him killed. He wants him taken alive. By the way, notice David's confidence. David actually goes into battle expecting that he will win the battle. And certainly David had a great advantage. He's a seasoned general. He had fought many battles. In fact, he lived himself in the wilderness for 10 years, escaping from Saul and so forth. So he definitely had the advantage. He believed he would win. But when they capture his son, that's what they want him to do. He wants him to do. Capture him, don't kill him. So the people went out in the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. And the people of Israel were overthrown before the servants of David, and a great slaughter, 20,000, took place there that day. For the battle there was scattered all over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than even the sword devoured. And so here we see that even God was fighting for David. God was behind David. David, you remember when he fled, Absalom's taking over the kingdom, and he had such humility. He's leaving, and he's realizing, hey, if God doesn't want me to be king, I'll go out. But if God wants me back, he'll bring me back. And of course, that's exactly what God did, and God is fighting for David. Then Absalom met the servants of David. So now they spot Absalom. And Absalom rode on a mule, and it took off because it says the mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth, so that he was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. Now here you see irony. One of the very things that Absalom prided himself in, you remember, was his hair. He was a good-looking dude, had long, thick hair, you know. I don't know what shampoo he used back then, but it worked. He would have been in the commercials, right? And he had to cut it off every year, and it weighed so much weight. But the very thing that he prided himself became his demise. Now, a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, I just saw Absalom hanging in the terebinth tree. And Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him? And why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. You could have killed him. I'd pay you handsomely. The man says, though I were to receive thousands shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. So he tells him, you're crazy, man. I love my head more than I like, coins. and perhaps he remembered, what happened to the guy who said, hey, David, I took Saul's life, your enemy. David said, behead the guy. That was the king. You don't take the king's life, So he's probably thinking, man, if he didn't spare that guy's life, what's he going to do to the guy that takes his own son's life? So he says, otherwise I would have dwelt falsely against my own life, verse 13. Because there's nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. In other words, if I had taken his life and David gets mad, you would have said, I didn't do it, he did. That's what he's kind of saying. So Joab said, look, I can't linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the tree. So Joab isn't wasting, man. He doesn't put 1 in the heart. He puts 3 right on the target. Boom, boom, boom. He wants to make sure he's dead. And 10 young men bore Joab's armor, surrounded Absalom, and struck him and killed him also. So they made Absalom, man, a human pincushion. I mean, they just made sure he was dead. And Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods, and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, every one to his tent. And that's talking about the people that had supported him. What a tragic end to his life. You remember Absalom's, the guy that defected to him, Ahithophel. Remember, he didn't take his counsel. He went and hung himself, which was horrible enough. But here's Absalom. Rather than dying in a noble way and buried with the kings of Israel in the tombs, his dead body is thrown into a pit in the forest. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name. And to this day it is called Absalom's monument. Now, we do read back in chapter 14 and verse 27 that he had 3 sons, but apparently they had died early. And so he had made this monument to himself so that he would not be forgotten. Again, he was a very proud man. But I'm reminded of Proverbs 10:7. It says, the memory of the righteous are blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. And when we think of Absalom, that's what comes to mind. That's his legacy. Defecting and causing a coup and treason against his own father for his own gain, and then dying a horrible death. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, hey, let me run now and take news to the king how the Lord has avenged him of his enemies. And Joab said, you're not going to take the news this day. You'll take it another day. But today, no news, because the king's son is dead. So this guy, Ahimaaz, he's the priest's son, and he wants to be the messenger. I want to take the news to the King David, But he couldn't. So Joab said to the Cushite, go tell the king what you've seen. And the Cushite bowed himself to Joab, and he ran. Then Ahimaaz, he comes back. Hey, man, let me run after the Cushite. Let me go. Come on, let me go. It's just this young cat, he just wants to say, he thinks he can do it. Come on, I want to do it. Why will you run, my son, since you have no news ready? I haven't told you everything that happened. I want to run anyway. Okay, go. Whatever happens, let me run. He just wants to run. So he let him run. And Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and he outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate to the wall, and his eyes looked, and there was a man running alone. So David's down by the city gates, but of course the watchtower is higher, and he sees a guy running. And he tells the king, and the king says in verse 25, if he's alone, there's good news in his mouth, or there's news in his mouth. And he comes rapidly, and he drew near, and the watchman then saw another man running. And the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, hey, there's another man running alone. The king said, well, he brings news as well. And the watchman said, I think the running of the first guy is Ahimaaz. So everybody must have known this guy. He must like to run or something. Oh, that's that guy. He's always running around town. I've seen this guy before. That's who it is. And the king said, well, he's a good man. He comes with good news. So he obviously had, a good testimony. And Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, hey, David, all is well. And he bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my Lord. So he knew that they had won the battle, that David's forces had won. But the king said, what about the young man Absalom? What about my son? Ahimaaz answered, well, when Joab sent the king's servant and me, your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I didn't know what it was about. In other words, I don't know, right? So here is this, he's really a kind of type of impetuous young man, right? Just, I got to do something. Yeah, but you don't know what you're doing, man. Why don't you just sit back a little bit and, but he didn't. He wanted to do his thing. So the king said to him, turn aside and stand here. So he turned aside and stood still. I think there's sometimes we can be young. I remember at times, I want to do it. Let me do it. And then, you could do it and you blew it. You didn't even know what you're doing. Why? Because you need to learn. Slow down and, take it in, grow, mature, Well, just then the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, there's good news, my Lord and King. For the Lord has avenged you this day on all those who rose against you. Now, the king knew that. He said to him, but what about the young man Absalom? Is he safe? And the Cushite answered. What did he say? Yeah, you better believe it. He's a human pincushion. No, he doesn't say that. He uses tact, and this is good. He said, may the enemies of my Lord and King and all who rise against you to do harm. So he's reminding him, this man, your son, he committed treason. He came against the whole kingdom. Those who do like him, may they be like that young man. So it was another way of saying your son has died. Someone said this, tact is the knack of making a point without making an enemy. That's a good word. That's a great talent to learn, to show tact, to be wise and discerning in the way that we share things. And that's what this man did. And so the king was deeply moved, and he went up to the chamber over his gate, and he wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Now, obviously, nothing wrong with David weeping over the loss of his son. What a loss, what a horrible thing. However, what we're going to see is that his over-weeping and his condition as being a leader caused problems. So we come to chapter 19, and Joab was told, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. But here was the problem. David continued to do it. So check it out. The victory that day then has been turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard it and said that day, the king is grieved for his son. And the people, they stole back into that city that day as people who are ashamed to steal away when they flee into battle. Oh, we won, but we better not show we're excited that we won, you know. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." And again, nothing wrong with him grieving for his son, but it affected his leadership as a king. And that's when it became a problem. So Joab came to the house to the king and said, "Today, David," and he was being truthful and he needed to hear it, "You've disgraced all of the servants today who saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and of your wives and of your concubines. In that you love your enemies, it sounds like, and you hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes or servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, it would have pleased you well. Now therefore, king, I tell you, you need to arise, go out, and you need to speak comfort, encouragement to all the servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not one will stay with you this night. And that it'll be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen from your youth until now." So Joab rebukes David, and rightfully so. David's attitude was causing the people to actually reconsider their allegiance to him as king. And it seemed as if he was more concerned about the man, his son, who committed treason than the people that risked their life for the whole nation. Warren Wiersbe had some good words on this. He said, "Certainly we expect a father to grieve over the tragic death of a son and to even overlook the son's mistakes and his sins. But," this is a good word, "leaders must still lead, even if their hearts are broken." That's one of the prices leaders have to pay. I just want to stop right there. This quote, I've had to do that. There have been times in my life I had to do that. That's what leaders do. You have to do that. You have to set aside your feelings and all those things and say, what is right, and a leader must lead. David the father forgot that he was also David the king, and that he still had his crown because his brave soldiers put the good of the nation ahead of their own personal interests, end quote. That's a good word. So it's not easy. Those of you who have leadership roles, maybe in the workplace or in the church, it's difficult sometimes to be the leader. So Joab, though, jolted the king back into reality, and it worked because it tells us the king arose and he sat in the gate. So he came out to the gate where everyone was. And they told all the people, saying, "There's the king. He's sitting at the gate." So all the people came before the king, and every one of Israel had fled to his tent, for everyone had done that. So now everybody now is coming to him, and they're encouraged. The king is with us. He's encouraged, and he's probably telling them, "Thank you for what you did. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for restoring me back into the kingdom." But again, there's many things we can learn from David. This is a good one. Even though he had blown it at first, you know what? He was teachable. This is a great quality. Listen, David at this point is about 60 years old. And you know what? As king, he could have blown Joab off. "Hey, listen, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm the king, man. I'm the king. I just lost my son, and I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. Leave me alone." But you know what? David was open to rebuke. David was open to correction because he was teachable. And so he sets aside his feelings and he does the right thing. That's a great quality. Now, verse 9, all the people were in dispute throughout all the tribes, saying, "The king has saved us from the hand of our enemies. He delivered us from the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, who we anointed over us, has died in the battle. Now, therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing him back?" In other words, we need to get all the tribes together now because they're kind of divided. We need to get together, and we need to back David again being king. So King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, saying, "Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, but why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the words of all Israel have come to the king this very house? You're my brethren. You're my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king?" So David was a little frustrated because his own people, again, David was from the tribe of Judah. Why were they so slow in being the ones to bring him back in leadership? So notice what he does, verse 13. He said to Amasa, "Are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more so, if you are not commander of the army before me continually in the place of Joab." So David has a plan. What he does is he removes Joab from being his lead commander and he puts Amasa in his place. Why did he do that? Did he do it because Joab had rebuked him? No. We can't say exactly why he did it, but we most likely believe that this was a way of uniting the tribes because Amasa was, first of all, Absalom's commander. And by making Amasa the commander, it was a way of saying, even to those people, look, I hold no bitter feelings against you. Let's get united. And so for the better of the nation, he makes that man his commander. In that sense, we see that David has a forgiving spirit, to be certain. He grants amnesty to Amasa and even makes him his commander. Well, that blows me away. Pretty amazing. So he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, just as the hearts of one man. So they sent this word to the king, return, you and all your servants. Then the king returned and he came to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go and to meet the king, to escort the king across the Jordan. Gilgal is about 20 miles from Jerusalem. By the way, it's the first place, if you remember, that the children of Israel rested when they came into the promised land. That was the first place they settled. And it was at Gilgal now that the tribe of Judah comes to escort David and to bring him now back to the throne in Jerusalem. Now, verse 16, Shimei, the son of Gera, was a Benjamite who was from Bahurim, and he hastened, he came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. If you remember him, we're going to talk about him in a minute. There were also 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, so a lot of the tribe of Benjamin came. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, that was Mephibosheth's servant. We remember him. We're going to talk about him in a moment. And his 15 sons and his 20 servants came with him, and they went over the Jordan before the king. Then a ferry boat went across to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought good. So again, here we have a gathering of people coming to help escort David come back into Jerusalem. Very encouraging. But several people, as I say, jump out. The first is this character, Shimei. Do you remember we saw him in chapter 16 last time? He was the guy that when David is leaving Jerusalem, right, being, ousted by his son Absalom, he comes over there and Shimei is throwing up dust in there and throwing rocks at David and throwing rocks at David's mighty men. And he calls David, you rogue. God is bringing justice. He's bringing the house back to Saul. You were a terrible guy and so forth. That's Shimei. He was more loyal to Saul than, of course, to King David. By the way, we talked about the fact that he represents those kind of people that kick you when you're down, right? I mean, David's at his lowest point, and you got some guy throwing rocks at you going, you deserve it. It's like, hey, thank you so much, Mr. Encouragement. Anyway, he really brought David down even at his lowest. And yet here he shows up. However, as he comes, now Shimei, the son of Gera, verse 18, it tells us, fell down before the king when he had crossed the Jordan. Then he said to the king, do not let my lord impute the iniquity to me, or remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my lord the king left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart. And that was only maybe a month ago, if that. Hey, would you please not remember that? Really? Don't take it to heart? And then he says, I, your servant, know that I've sinned. So the good thing is he comes honest, he repents. Therefore, here I am, the first to come to you today of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my Lord the king. So he confesses his sin and he asks for forgiveness. That's a commendable thing. Not easy for David to forgive, but again, David has a forgiving heart and this guy's repenting. Now, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said, shall not Shimei be put to death for this because he cursed the Lord's anointed? Now, if you remember back in chapter 16, it was also Abishai who turned to David. That was happening. He said, hey, David, let me just take the dude's head off. Can we just take his head off? Let me take his head off. He was also the guy that snuck with David in the camp and said, let me put a spear through Saul. Come on, let me do it. So this guy was like always wanting trouble. And David said, what do I have to do to you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries of me today? Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For do I not know that today I'm being king of Israel? Listen, it's a great day. I'm being restored as a king. I don't want to put anybody to death. Therefore, the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king swore to him. What an incredible thing that God uses this guy to curse David. And David just has a heart to forgive him. What a great example. I like what one person said. Most of us would rather sit on the judgment seat than the mercy seat, right? It's true, right? We like standing on the judgment seat. You are wrong. We don't always like extending mercy. But God wants us to be on the mercy seat. He wants us to be merciful and forgiving. And here's David, one of his most vocal adversaries, and he forgives him. Wow. One commentator wrote, "The humbled forgiven make good forgivers." Remember that. The humble forgiven make good forgivers. The proud have a hard time forgiving. Those who have never recognized their own failures have a tough time tolerating and understanding and forgiving others. But again, the humble forgiven make good forgivers. Why was David able to forgive him? I think David was able to remember and say, wait a second, God forgave me for committing adultery. God forgave me for committing murder. But you know what's a motivator for us? I've been forgiven an unpayable debt. Remember Jesus gave the parable about the man who owed an unpayable debt, and he went to the king and he begged him, please forgive me, and the king forgave him. But then that man went out and found a guy that owed him $20 and puts his hands to his neck, pay me what you owe, you bum, And the king hears about it and he throws him in prison. How dare you? I forgave you all your debt and you mistreat this man for $20? And that speaks of us. You and I have been forgiven an unpayable debt. It's our sin. Jesus forgave us an unpayable debt. So who are we not to forgive others who have done something against us, right? That's the whole point of the parable. So I love what that commentator says. The humble forgiven make good forgivers. We need to remember we've been forgiven so much. Now, we would all agree that forgiveness is important, but when it comes down to it, we don't always like to give it. We choose different options. So I jotted down some different options that we do in forgiveness. Sometimes we extend conditional forgiveness. That's like, I'll forgive you if, or I'll forgive you as soon as you, or you make your move and I'll determine whether or not I'll make mine, right? Conditional forgiveness. Then there's partial forgiveness. I'll forgive you, but don't expect me to forget, right? That's partial forgiveness. Or I'll forgive you, but if it happens again, partial forgiveness. And then there's also what I would call delayed forgiveness. I'll forgive you, however, you've got to give me some time, right? You got to give me some time. You don't know what I went through. I know I need to forgive you, but I'm still dealing with some issues. Well, the issue is you haven't forgiven them. That's the issue, right? So you have conditional, partial, and delayed. All of those are dangerous because you know what? They can go to resentment, and resentment can go to bitterness, and bitterness can go to hatred, and hatred can go to revenge, and revenge can even go to murder. That's why Jesus, you remember in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, you've heard it of old, you shall not murder. If anyone murders, he's in danger of judgment. Oh, everybody's, yeah, I don't agree with that. But I say to you, Jesus said, anyone who's angry at his brother will be in danger of judgment. Angry? Yeah, because anger takes that path and can lead even to murder. And so Ephesians 4:32 says, forgiving one another, just as Christ forgave us. We need to be forgivers. So, moving on, we come to verse 24. Now, Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down as well to meet the king. And he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he returned to his peace. Interesting. I thought if he didn't care for his feet, trim his mustache, or wash his clothes, I think he'd be talking about a teenager. But anyway, that's a whole different story. So this guy didn't take care of himself ever since David had to flee. Right? He was in mourning. So it was when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king, he said to the king, why did you not go? Or the king said to him, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? So now Mephibosheth shows up. Do you remember who he is? Well, he was Jonathan's son, and David said, I'm not going to put you to death, though he deserved being put to death because he was of the household of Saul. But he spared him in keeping his oath to Jonathan. But if you remember back in chapter 16 when David was fleeing for his life, Ziba, who was Mephibosheth's servant, came and joined himself to David. And David then said, well, where's Mephibosheth? And Ziba said to him, oh, he stayed back. He didn't want to come. He actually has sided with Absalom. That's what Ziba said. So now Mephibosheth shows up, and David's saying, what's going on here? Well, he tells the king, verse 26, my lord, O king, my servant Ziba, he had deceived me. For he said to your servant, I will saddle my donkey for myself that I may ride on it and go to the king because your servant is lame. So he basically said, look, I'm going to go to David and I'm going to bring back for you. But he never did. He left him in Jerusalem, and then he lies to David saying Mephibosheth didn't want to come at all. Now, if you remember also, because Ziba had showed up to help David, David gave all of Mephibosheth's property to Mephibosheth. However, look what Mephibosheth says in verse 27. First of all, he slandered my servant to the Lord and King. That's not true. I wanted to come. He abandoned me. He lied. But my Lord, the king, is like the angel of God. Therefore, do what is good in your eyes. So my servant deceived me, and he deceived you. But whatever action you take, I'm willing to take it. For all my father's house were but dead men before my Lord and King. In other words, because Mephibosheth was of the house of Saul, he deserved to die. And David had pity on him because he wanted to honor his oath. And so he spared him. So he said, I was as good as a dead man. And David, you spared my life. You set your servant among those who eat at your own table, he says here. Therefore, what right have I to cry out any more to the king? So the king said to him, why do you speak any more of the matter? Hey, you and Ziba divide the land. So David realized he had been snookered, right? And he realized that Ziba had lied. So he says, I'll tell you what, you guys just split the property. By the way, there's a good lesson here. And the lesson is this. I've learned it over the years. Listen, don't always be quick to judge when you hear someone share something with you the first time, right? Because you hear someone say, oh, this happened and this. Oh, really? Okay, well, I'm going to talk to the other person. Now, can you tell me? Well, that's why whenever I've done marriage counseling, my wife and I have marriage counseling, I don't meet with couples separately. That's pretty much, I'm not going to get a whole bunch because there's always her side, his side, and it's the truth somewhere in the middle, you know? Everybody that's done marriage counseling, they're all like, yep, I can see them. That's right. That's right. So, first of all, if someone comes to me and starts telling me about someone else, I say, stop. Did you go to that person? Because the Bible says if you have an ought between your brother, you need to go to them. So that's the first step. Oh, well, you're gossiping, so don't tell me. Go to them. But when you hear something, don't always be quick to hear the first thing because we have a tendency to do it. Oh, I can't believe that, right? And then someone else tells you, like, oh, really? I thought it was oh boy. That's exactly what David did. So a good lesson. So David says, hey, Mephibosheth, you and Ziba split the land. But Mephibosheth says to the king, verse 30, rather, let him take it all. I don't care about all the stuff. Inasmuch as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house. Look you've blessed me. You spared my life. You've been able to let me eat at your table. I don't care about any of this stuff. I'm glad you're king again. Man, he had a good heart. Now, moving on, we also meet with another person that we saw before, and that's Barzillai the Gileadite in verse 31. He came down from Rogelim, went across the Jordan with the king to escort him across the Jordan as well. Now, remember, this guy had come and met David when he had been on his journey in the last chapter, and he had brought him all kinds of supplies that David had desperately needed. Again, he was there to greet his friend at a time he needed him, and here he is again as David's being restored. He's there to greet him. The fascinating thing is his age. Now, Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. And he had provided the king with supplies while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. So think about this. We often think of someone who, and you're 80 years old, man, that's time just to kick back and, relax. Have someone serve you, right? 80 years old. But what I just want to point out is the fact that here he is actively involved in ministry. There's another guy that comes to my mind. His name's Moses. You remember him? 40 years learning to be a somebody as the prince of Egypt. Spent another 40 years learning how to be a nobody, living in the desert. And then God says, I can make something out of nothing. And at 80, calls him to ministry and uses him for the next 40 years. So some of you are, getting retired. You know what I do? I turned 50 something some time ago, and they started sending me these AARP cards. You know what I do them? I throw them in the trash every time I get them. I am not old. Some of you do. I'm not, that's just my thing. Don't get mad at me. You know what? Hey, I'm just getting going is my thought. And some of us get a little, and we're all different. I realize we're all a little different, but I want to encourage you, no matter what age you are as you get older, listen, serve Jesus. Serve Jesus with all that you have. Use your extra time serving Jesus. Some of you are retired. Sometimes you have husbands and wife both retired. First of all, God never intended husband and wife to be with one another 24 hours a day. I say that all the time. It's the truth. First of all, I say, you're going to drive one another crazy. You're going to drive one crazy. And every time, I'm sure the guy comes in, you're right. I need to find something else to do. Yes, you do. A lot of times guys go back and go, I get a part-time job. Or you can come here, serve the Lord. Get involved in a parachurch ministry, but serve Jesus. I love the fact this guy's 80. Now the king says to him in verse 3, come across with me and I'll provide for you while you're with me in Jerusalem. Man, I'd love you to come on, hang out with me at the palace. But he said to the king, how long have I to live that I should go with the king to Jerusalem? Look, I'm 80 years old today. So it was his birthday. How about that? And he says, can I discern between good and bad? Can your servant taste and eat what I drink? Can I hear any longer the voice of singing men and women? Look, I can't taste anymore. I've lost my taste buds. I can hardly hear anything, you know? Why then should your servant be a burden to my Lord and King? Look, I'm just falling apart is what he's saying. I just be in the way. So your servant will go a little way across the Jordan with the king. For why should the king repay me with such a reward? You've been so kind to me. Please let your servant turn back again, that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and mother. But here is your servant Chimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king and do what seems good to you. So I have someone who's a great guy. I think he would bless you. Take him, mentor him, let him serve you in the palace. The king answered and said, Chimham shall cross over with me, and I'll do for him what seems good to you. Now, whatever you request of me, I will do for you. Then all the people went over the Jordan, and when the king had crossed over, the king kissed Barzillai, blessed him, and he returned to his own palace. Now the king went on to Gilgal with Chimham, who, by the way, later on we learned was his son. Barzillai's son. And it went on with him, and all the people of Judah escorted the king, also half of the people of Israel. So Lot went out with David, not all of the tribes, but many. Just then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why have our brother and the men of Judah stolen you away and brought the king his household and all David's men with him cross over the Jordan? So some of the tribes, and not everybody was unified here. They're like, well, why'd you let the guys in Judah do it, you know? So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, said, well, because the king is a close relative of ours. Why then are you angry over the matter? It's no big deal. Have we ever eaten at the king's expense? Or has he given us any gift? We haven't got any, special favors for this at all. We just want to honor one guy from our tribe. And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 shares in the king. Therefore, we also have no right to David. We have more right to David than you. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to advise bringing back the king? And they were. Yet the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. So just as things are looking up, there's a little tension between the tribes. So keep that in mind, and we come to the last chapter I want to look at. And it happened there that a rebel whose name was Sheba. Listen, it only takes one person, one divisive person, stopping a great work of God. Now, you can't stop a genuine work of God. You're not going to stop a genuine work of God, but you can hurt a lot of people in the process. That's exactly what this dude does. This guy Sheba, he causes problems. Titus 3:10 says, reject a divisive man after the first and second time. You go to him. If they don't want to walk in unity, don't have fellowship with them. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 6:9, God hates a guy that sows discord. And this is the kind of guy. Check it out. Sheba, the Benjamite, he blew a trumpet. He said, we have no share in David, nor do we have an inheritance the son of Jesse, every man to his tent, O Israel. So every man of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. Man, but the men of Judah from Jordan as far as Jerusalem remained loyal to their king. Man, this guy's just caused problem. Now, Israel's now back on the brink of civil war. One dude. Let me tell you, I've seen a lot of things that one person can do. And usually when you have a divisive person in the church, usually it's not even over something that's doctrinal. I've never seen it happen over doctrinal issues. And check it out. Sheba's upset because Judah had a more prominent role. Hey, they got to do more than we got to do. Who cares? You got your king back, But sometimes people will cause division over crazy, crazy things. Well, I wasn't asked to be over a ministry, Or I don't like the particular requirements. I don't have to fill out a form, Or I wasn't allowed to do whatever I wanted. All those kind of things. Whatever it is, it goes on and on. It always comes down to selfishness. Just submit to the authority that God places there. It's pretty simple, But, people that are just set on having their own way, doing their own thing, they cause a lot of problem. And this was Sheba. Now, David came to his house at Jerusalem. So David now comes into the kingdom, although now a lot of people aren't behind it because of this guy. In fact, they're following him. And the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom have left and keep in the house, those who had been violated by Absalom, and he put them in seclusion. So they had been ritually defiled, remember, by Absalom. And David supported those ladies, but he did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living in widowhood. And the king said to Amasa, assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days and present yourself. So remember, David had made Amasa in order to kind of bring peace between all the tribes, and he makes him his new general. And his first assignment is this: I want everybody assembled within 3 days. So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time that David had appointed. He didn't do it. Now that can cause a problem. So David said to Abishai, now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. David knows, listen, we need to act decisively, need to do it now, or it's going to be worse than when Absalom. He's going to really divide the kingdom. So take your Lord's servant and pursue him. He can't wait for Amasa now. He's been waiting. So he gets Abishai. Abishai is the kind of guy who wants to pin people down, cut off their heads. He gets the job done. Here's your dude, right? Take the Lord's servant, pursue that guy, unless he find himself fortified cities and escape us. So Joab's men with the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men went out with them. So guess what? Abishai works for Joab. So Joab is now kind of taking control again. And they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. So all the troops are now assembled, and along with Joab, the former commander, they're there. And when they went, there was a large stone which is at Gibeon, and Amasa came before them. So as they're leaving to go get this guy Bichri, here's Amasa, and he's kind of meandering around. And we don't know what he was doing, but Joab was dressed in battle armor, and it was on his belt with a sword fastened in the sheath in his hips, and he was going forward, and it fell out, which, by the way, was purposeful. Keep in mind, Joab did not trust Amasa one bit. Amasa, remember, was the one who had betrayed David and actually was with Absalom. And not only that, the fact that he took his place probably humiliated him. So Joab said to Amasa, are you in health, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him, but Amasa did not notice a sword was in Joab's hand. And he struck him with it in the stomach, and his entrails poured out to the ground, and he did strike him again. Thus he died. He didn't need to. Everything was gone right there. So once again, these guys are some bloody guys. Joab takes matters into his own hands. So now, at the same time, Joab was the man that removed all of David's enemies. And he was kind of the man you were glad he was on your side. It was this man, Joab, who had killed Saul's commander, Abner. He killed David's rebellious son, Absalom. And now he kills Absalom's former commander, even the one David had there. But David didn't even use him because he was late in coming and so forth. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. So he just basically gets rid of this guy, and listen, we're for David. Forget about that guy. Wow. I'm glad I didn't live back then, that's for sure. Meanwhile, one of Joab's men stood near Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab, whoever is for David, follow Joab. So everybody keep going, follow Joab. We're going to get the job done. But Amasa wallowed in his blood in the middle of the highway. And when the men saw, all the people stood still. And so he moved Amasa from the highway to the field and put a garment over him, so that when he saw that everyone who came upon him had halted. And when he was removed from the highway, all the people then went on after Joab to pursue Sheba. So all these people were stopping as they're on the road. Is that Amasa? Yeah, it is, man. Wow. So he kind of took him aside, covered him, and everybody now following Joab. That's a good motivator to follow Joab. I'm following Joab. I'm for Joab for sure. And he went through all the tribes to Abel and Beth Maachah and all the Beriites. So they were gathered together and also went after Sheba. Then they came and besieged him in Abel of Beth Maachah. So this area is about 25 miles north of Jerusalem. So this guy, they had to pursue him a long distance. And he was found, though, in this city. And so it tells us they cast up a siege mound against the city. So Joab gets all the people. We're just going to surround the city, wall it up, and we're going to start sieging the city. We're going to take it. And everybody in there is going to die until we find, Bichri. And we read that they stood by the rampart, and all the people who were with Joab battered the wall to throw it down. And just then a wise woman cried out from the city, "Hear, hear! Please say to Joab, 'Come nearby that I may speak with you.' And when he'd come near to her, the woman said, 'Are you Joab?' He says, 'I am.' She knew all about his reputation. He was a man of business. She said to him, 'Hear the words of your maidservant.' He said, 'I'm listening.' She said, they used to talk in former times, saying, 'They shall surely seek the guidance at Abel.' We were a place where people would seek guidance from us, and we'd end disputes. And I'm among the peaceful and the faithful in Israel. I'm not seeking her. I want peace, and I want peace in our nation, and I'm for David. Yet you seek to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord?" In other words, all these people in the city are going to die if you're sieging the city. Joab says, "Hey, far be it from me that I should swallow up and destroy. That's not my intention. Not so. But the man from the mountains of Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri, by name, has raised his hand against the king, against David. Deliver him only, and I'll depart from you. Look, all I want is Sheba, and this is done deal." So the woman said to Joab, "Watch, his head will be thrown over to you over the wall." And these are tough times, right? Everybody's losing their head. Don't mess around those days. Then the woman in her wisdom went to all the people. She goes, "Look it's either one guy's head or all of our heads. What do you think?" They're like, "Where is the guy?" They cut off his head, the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and they threw it out to Joab. Then he blew a trumpet. They withdrew from the city, every man to his tent, and Joab returned to the king at Jerusalem. So they put a swift stop to that rebellion. Now, the chapter ends just with mentioning David's next administration. Joab is now over the army of Israel, back 23, so he's back in command. Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, is over the Cherethites and Pelethites. Again, those two groups of people are David's bodyguards. Adoram is in charge of the revenue, so he's the treasurer. Jehoshaphat, he's the recorder. Shiva's the scribe. Zadok and Abiathar, they are the priest. And Ira the Jerethite was the chief minister under David. So several lessons we learned from this chapter. I just want to close again and just talking about how David was a man who was a forgiver. I think that's a good thing to talk about. We could talk about how horrible it is to see, division. We see that with Absalom. We see this with this guy Sheba, but we also see the opportunity to be forgivers. Colossians 3:13 says, "Bearing with one another and forgiving one another, even as Christ forgave you." I'll close with the words of William Ward. He said this: "We are most like beasts when we kill. We are most like men when we judge. We are most like God when we forgive." It's a good word. Let's pray.